So let's get started. Cost escalation, cash flow, interest rate, labour shortages. I'm pretty sure these are all topics that we are keeping a close eye on. In 2022, the global supply chain faced its worst shortages in 50 years. These problems started with the pandemic, got compounded with the war in Ukraine, and recently the World Economic Forum suggested that we need to brace ourselves for at least another year of low growth, high prices, and empty shelves. Now, at the same time, the Infrastructure Australia's Market Capacity Report is predicting labour market demand will peak at 442,000 at the end of the year. To give you a bit of context, this is more than double the projected available supply. That's not all, I've got more. The ABS also found 29% of construction businesses have job vacancies, and that's an increase compared to the 23% previous years. Now, ultimately, all this to say that something is going to have to give. On top of that, we are seeing insolvencies rise at an incredible rate. But really, those are the media headlines. They are facts. But when you sort of peel it off a bit, there's a bit more of a nuanced story here for all of us, depending on where you are on the value chain. So what we want to do, and we're trying to do at Procore, is to improve the lives of everybody in construction, but we also want to do that based on data. So what I'm going to present to you, and that's my little sales pitch here, we commissioned a third-party report with Dodge Data Analytics, and what we did is we surveyed over 500, I think close to 550 contractors across 5 markets. So we spoke to, I think it was obviously mechanical, electrical, steel, plumbing, and concrete subcontractors, and we spoke to all of them across 5 markets, the US, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. And so what I'm going to be talking about now are some of the findings. So let's start with the obvious one, profitability. Across the board, our subcontractors report an average annual profit margin of 21%. Steel is leading the way, and concrete is a bit of a laggard in that space. But for us in Australia and New Zealand, what we're seeing is 59% of these companies report above average margin. So that's the good news. Now, on the other hand, when it comes to margin, it's still a bit of a plague, really. What we're seeing is that 99%, not surprising, but 99% of businesses reported margin erosion. What you can see from the graph behind me, and I hope you can all read properly, but what you can see is that many of the causes of margin erosion could be tempered, or we could solve for with better planning, but also better information sharing, better communication. So who are the prime offenders when it comes to margin erosion? I'm going to give you the top 3. Right, the first one at 42% are material challenges. So when I say challenges, what I'm talking about is really delays, shortage, price fluctuation. That's followed at 30% by the lack of skilled labour. I'm sure that's not a surprise, but it's way up there, and we'll talk about it in a minute. And finally, 29% report that inaccurate estimating is also eating a big chunk of that margin. So to go in a bit more detail here, like I said, we need to sort of unpack a bit the layers here. I want to look at this, scales of the companies. What you see here is that pretty much the large companies are having it tough right now. And the large or very large companies or businesses say that internal processes are the main problem versus their smaller peers. For instance, here, what we're seeing is that 26% of the large businesses mention inefficient procurement eroding the margin, and that's compared to 11% for the smaller businesses. And the same goes basically for the reporting between field and office, which is a problem for 29% of the big businesses or companies, compared to 14% for the smaller ones. Now, something that is systemic and a problem for everybody is rework. Rework continues to drain not only our productivity, but also our schedule management, cost control, and margin, of course. What we found in this report, the Dodge report, is that across the board, specialty or subcontractors report that 32% of the margin erosion is tied to rework. 32% is tied to potentially mistakes, poor quality, compliance issues, but also it could go down to your communication methods. All of this, 32%. And what's maybe a bit more alarming for us here in Australia is that mechanical contractors report 28% of very high losses, margin losses. That's right after steel, 34%. So that's definitely something to think about. And it is a question that will go straight to our panelist as well. Now, given the severity of the labour shortages, and we will speak about that, I think, quite a bit in the panel, the key message that we took out of the report that we ran with Dodge was that there is a need to optimise the current productivity of your workers, right? What we found is that 20% of workers' time is actually spent on low productivity tasks. 20%. Almost a quarter of your day on low productivity tasks. Low productivity could be tracking down your information, finding the Excel sheet, finding the drawing for people who still use a drawing. It could be just documenting the information in an Excel sheet, sending that Excel sheet. And what we're finding here, and it's on the right-hand side of the screen, the bigger the company, the lower the productivity. Yeah. So the call to action here very much so is, of course, we need to look after, retain, also gain skilled labour, but there's also a second sort of direction that we should consider, which is making sure we are optimising the productivity of the current resources. Resources being people, of course, but also your systems. And for that, nothing like communication. Most of the specialty contractors, sorry, that's the American term for me at Procore, subcontractors say or told us in that report that field-to-office communication needs to improve. In fact, it was 25% of them said that poor reporting between the office and the site was a major cause of their margin losses. When you think about it, not only is it going to impact your project performance, it's probably also going to reduce the effectiveness and the value of any new technologies that you're trying to implement in the business. So this is one of the questions I'll be asking the panelists as well. Now, the juicy one was something at Procore we talk about a lot, and unfortunately the numbers don't seem to go down nearly fast enough. But we are very much so still stuck in spreadsheets. I'm going to pause a second and let you look at the numbers. What it's saying is that 39% of subcontractors are still using spreadsheets, sometimes whiteboards, or paper-based process instead of specialised software for those important functions in their daily tasks. And unfortunately, again, for us here, mechanical trades or contractors have the lowest tech adoption across all 5 sectors. Something that we talk about a lot, or that we see a lot in those spreadsheets, is everything linked to payments. So what we found from this report is that nearly 1/3 of payments are made 60 days plus after invoicing. The call to action ultimately here is for better financial control and solutions. But explaining a bit the stat here, we are finding a consistent feedback across the board. 34% of electrical contractors, get paid within 30 days of invoiced work. And that's followed by 33% for concrete, 32% for mechanical, and unfortunately only 16% of steel subcontractors get paid within 30 days of invoiced work. I have 2 more slides. Thank you for your patience. I told you there'd be a lot of data, but I'm going to wrap it up very soon, I promise. I want to talk about skills. Yep. We asked specialty contractors and all these respondents, 550 of them across 5 regions, about skill shortages as well. And look at the left one, all in green. You're not imagining it. Australia lines up with Canada in terms of impact. Yeah, it's important to look at that. Across the board, only 6% of our respondents reported 0 impact. 6% reported no impact. Doesn't mean they didn't have it or they didn't know how to measure it. That could be a reason. But 41% admitted that skill shortage is affecting at least 50% of their total portfolio of projects. Steel companies, unfortunately, here in the smaller size businesses are sort of at the bottom of the chain. We're getting hit the hardest. So to wrap it up, and soon I'll be introducing our panelists, we know that business owners, construction leaders, industry as a sector, we need to move away from these sort of manual methods. What you can see from the graph here is really that there is plenty of room to improve and automate processes. You can just look at the numbers here. These areas, in particular labour scheduling and planning or safety reporting that still uses manual method, is the sort of Pandora's box to automate and make improvements. So while as an industry we are still trying to grasp those low-hanging fruit, there is movement. The needle is moving, and in fact, the global investment in construction tech is expected to reach over $30 billion US by 2027. So to give you, again, a bit of benchmark here, what that means is a compound growth rate of over 16% over the next 5 years. So with that said, and all this data, let me invite our panelists to the stage. Our first panelist today, and please help me with a round of applause as they come up, Mark Worsley, General Manager at Sublime Air Conditioning. Hannah Blossom, Director at Cundall. And Alex Soncini, Strategic Product Consultant at Procore. I'm going to get straight into it, and Hannah, I think I'm going to start with you. We heard about Built just before, and we talked digital engineering. I've had the chance to work with Cundall a few times over this year, and I know that Cundall is a digital-first engineering consultancy. So first question, and a two-part question. Can you please explain what the digital-first engineering term means in Cundall's terms? And also, if you could share with us some of the benefits of having this digital approach for managing stuff or elements like communication on the project phases or collaboration.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for having me here today. I guess just for anyone's context, Cundall is an engineering consultancy. We provide engineering in building services. We're a global company, so more broadly we do structural engineering, and my role is sustainability at Cundall. And obviously we're focused on integrated solutions that get best performance. Ultimately we want to deliver net zero buildings, and so I guess in its simplest form, that digital-led consultancy is around BIM and use of Revit and 3D design. And if I think back, like over my career, we've come, so far in that space. As soon as we're designing in 3D, we're coordinating with architects in 3D, and that opens up opportunities for analysis of buildings and better understanding in more detail around energy performance, daylight performance, thermal performance of our buildings. And that loop continues. We go back to facade refinement, we get mechanical systems refinement, we can optimize the size of the mechanical systems once the facades are better. And it doesn't stop there, but that's the bulk of it. We also you use digital approaches in tendering, internal, external communications. I guess a big part of it is collaboration between our offices, whether it's in Australia or globally. So having linked systems. And I mean, where we're going next on that, and I guess it's still fairly early days, is around parametric modelling ability. So having script set up that can, at a press of a button, run an analysis on a 3D model and give super quick feedback, so that in the early stages of a project we can provide that really quick feedback to architects and design teams and look at optioneering and better strategies and refinement in the first part of a project when it's the cheapest thing to do, the least cost impact. I think there was a second part. Yeah, so the second part is if you had some examples of those benefits of a digital-first approach. You did mention collaboration already. But one thing I was going to mention was, I suppose, in terms of thinking about I'm thinking about, a lot of what I do is sustainability certifications, so Green Star certification of buildings, and being able to track and manage documentation effectively in that space is enormous. So Green Star requires a huge amount of documentation to be collected during construction, because it's all about accountability and validation. And so if we can run that digitally, which we do on some projects, it's not necessarily industry standard to do that, but it just means everybody's got a better handle on what needs to be done and when it needs to be done. Agreed. Thank you. I will go back. I'm sure I saw Alex nod a lot with sustainability, so I'm actually going to keep it up, wait there, but I'm going to go to Mark. We just talked about communication. I presented earlier, it's one of the latest slides, that there is clearly a need for better communication. I talked about site to office, but generally speaking, communication in the form of collaboration can always be improved. And the number I actually shared was that 1/4 of our subcontractors said that
this poor communication affected the profit margin at the end. So, Mark, my question to you is, how are you actually addressing that in the field? And ideally, if you had sort of, takeaways, what worked, what didn't work, to share with us, I think it'd be helpful.
Yeah, sure. So I guess effectively we're duct manufacturers and also installers. So we have a factory, we have a head office, we have multiple sites. And it is complicated, obviously, as we know, to communicate to site, get your feedback, get the ideas out there, what needs to happen, when it needs to happen. So originally we had a lot of emails, we had WhatsApp groups, we had Excel, everything that you've mentioned, we had. Which then meant we had a lot of lost information, we had a lot of lessons to learn, but we never actually fulfilled them and moved on. So what we have been doing is we've been looked at, we're not just dot makers, so everything that we do, we need to sort of minimize what we are doing outside of dot making or installing. And so with that, how we communicate, and we talked about, the pandemic a little bit, and it was a big trigger point for us. It opened up to Teams meetings. All of a sudden we're having, 15-minute catch-ups with supervisors on site, understanding what their days are, what their needs are, what they're struggling with, what obstacles they need to overcome. But then also having that streamlined platform where we could have communication, whether it was observations, whether it was defects, whether it was drawings, or getting the right information to the right person at the right time, as opposed to, like say even drawings, printing a drawing once we've received the updated drawing and getting it to the installer. There's quite a delay on that. And so with the digital platform, obviously, as we receive a drawing, it can be instantly in someone's hands. So the whole lag is basically been wiped out.
Thank you. But Alex, I'm going to come to you just to follow up on the comments from Mark. We talked about the pandemic. I don't want to go back there, but it's a reality. It happened. We also mentioned quite a lot of the headwinds we're facing at the moment. Alex, what I'd love to hear from you, the industry has obviously changed in its behaviours. It has. What I'd like to hear from you is, with the Procore hat on, what changes have you noticed around the usage of tech in the sector?
Yeah, okay. The pandemic had a lot of challenges presented to us, so it's important to highlight what those challenges were. It's a lot of the stuff that you were mentioning. How can we collaborate more efficiently? How can we just be more efficient with our process? How do we manage construction with depleted workforces? And how do we deliver the same outcomes, the same quality, the same expectation that our clients have, that the builders that we work for have, that the industry expects? Actually, it's funny because in that How We Build Now report, I don't know if you pulled it up, but 53% of people responded that COVID actually was a really good thing to accelerate their tech adoption. So it forced change. And it forced change by addressing a lot of the challenges that we were feeling within the industry, whether it was dealing with the need for remote collaboration using digital tools. We saw Zoom and things like MS Teams blow up overnight. Everybody decided that's what we needed to use. I think about, so I was a CA back in the industry, working for builders and working closely with subcontractors as well, and doing stuff very manually back then. I've been at Procore since 2017, so you can imagine if we rewind the clock back to like the mid-teens, running contracts around for people to hand sign. So DocuSign blew up during the pandemic, and all of these different bits of technology were addressing certain challenges that we were feeling. There was a heightened focus on health and safety, so we saw the implementation of contactless operations, automating processes, certain remote monitoring systems, a lot of things that were already there before as well. Like, it's worth noting that. Construction has been pretty slow to change into technology, at least, and we can see that from a lot of the data that Jeremy's presented to us today. These technologies weren't new at the time. Sure, they might have made some changes to try and impact some of the challenges that we were feeling in the industry, but they weren't new, but we were forced to change. So for me, I think that as much as there was a lot of negativity attached to the pandemic and the way that we were trying to work through managing it, it was better for us, because we dropped some poor habits that we had built up over decades in managing certain processes through unavoidable challenge.
Thank you, Alex. And I'm sure if we're both based in New South Wales, the COVID, the pandemic, the past few years has definitely forced us to change a few bad habits and self-regulation in many different areas, but we're not going to go there today. I'm going to continue with you, though. There was what I call the juicy slide, and that was very self-centered. It's for us, but it was that number around spreadsheets, 39% still using paper, whiteboard, or manual processes to manage their daily tasks. So, Alex, still with you again. Why? I mean, you've worked in the industry, right? You've had the boots on the ground. You're now working with Procore. Why are we so attached as an industry, as a sector, to the spreadsheets? And if that's not actually the right question, maybe the question is, what's the risk if we don't start moving to digital now, if we haven't done it yet?
We'll try and answer both. Again, in the data that was represented to you, I think a lot of us are still attached to paper, let alone spreadsheets. Like I've got paper here. It makes me sick to have the paper. But Jeremy wouldn't give me an iPad, so hence I'm here with paper. But look, even in that how we build now report, and going back to some of your commentary around the way that we manage environmental processes and all of the reporting that we need to do there, 1 in 4 businesses are still managing all of that process on paper. That isn't to say that the other 3 in 4 are managing everything completely off paper. We just get some honesty out of the entirety of the process when it comes to managing. If we think about some of the other data in there, 1 in 4 are still using spreadsheets, right? Spreadsheets are familiar. They're a way that we can digitize a piece of paper and still feel like we're ticking the boxes throughout our process. They don't really necessarily positively impact our process or drive a little bit of process change. They are very flexible, and so they fit into just about anything we want to pigeonhole them into. And so when we think about, we have a very specific need at our business, at Sublime, or at another business, we can turn that specific need into a spreadsheet and fulfill our data requirement that way. There's also a perceived cost effectiveness of utilising a technology like that instead of a more specialised construction management or process management technology. But the risks of not moving are pretty apparent, even in what I'm just saying now. It's very difficult for us to standardise process in the industry. And think about the impact of that. People coming out of university and joining, or coming out of TAFE and joining your companies, or even just jumping from company to company, are often managing a process that's called the exact same thing, company to company, but in completely different ways, because now we've got this bespoke spreadsheet and this is how we manage this particular process. So it slows us down quite a bit. There's an increase of error and data inconsistency with manual entry, formulas. Even if you're using spreadsheets that are cloud-based, so thinking about Office 365 Excel or thinking about Google Sheets or something like that, oftentimes if we do have macros or anything in those, they break, people download them, then re-upload things, they forget to update the master copy, and so now there's multiple copies of the same spreadsheet, and then someone's got to go back and consolidate all that data. So even though we're presented with we're getting real-time visibility into this spreadsheet data, it tends to be errorous. And in fact, a lot of people are still using, the native spreadsheets, and those have no visibility into real-time data, and multiple stakeholders are often needing to access them and check them in and out. More than that, we will talk about it a bit more today, I think, but there's this need for all of our decision-making process. We have all this data now. If it's in a spreadsheet, it becomes very difficult to use. Unless you've got a data science degree and you know how to go and create these ridiculous pivot tables that enable you to actually utilize that data to make a decision, you're probably just looking at a spreadsheet and going like, I think, looking at these things, this is the decision that I need to make. And then you're looking at multiple versions of that spreadsheet across time. So very difficult for your reporting. It creates inefficiencies in reporting. It also just means that we're going to miss opportunities for automation and integration with other systems that our partners are using, that our clients are using as well.
Thank you.
Add on to that a little bit. So just to pick up on the process side of it and controlling that process. That was one thing that we did face in that, we'd have multiple different sites, and, we may have Joe and Fred on 2 different sites, 2 different orders coming in, 2 different ways of doing it. And then back in the office, we'd then have to decipher what that meant before we could even put it into the factory.
Yep.
So with the technology advances, what we've been able to do is build some apps where we could say, a paper-based site measure, for example, okay, let's put it into an app. We standardize, most of the fabricated parts. We set out, with consultation, how is that going to look, the key parts to it. So we then can deliver that to the factory in a format that's, predestined. It's already mandatory filled. We can understand that there's no RFIs going to come from it because whoever's doing the site measure had to think about filling in that box before they delivered it. Mm-hmm. And with that then becomes the automation into Procore, where we can then create an order and dispatch it to the factory. So that now means that we're in control of that site measure order. And then from a communication back to site perspective, with a digital database in the background, they're then able to see the status tracking of that site measure. So they're not, is that going to be next week? Is it going to be 3 days? It's fast tracked. Is it going to be tomorrow? They can see, the processes going through it. So you don't have that with a spreadsheet.
You've got more accountability, some auditing that you can do, and it's happening in real time.
Yep.
That's another issue that I didn't really raise, but even the lack of standardization within your own organization and having spreadsheets differ between different projects and managing things differently, even just within your own organization, it's a great point.
I agree, but you prompted something, Mark. I don't know if there's anybody from government here, but we're going to just pretend. Do you think there's a role or need for tighter collaboration? And I'm talking, think of it as a triad, so industry, government, and maybe just academia or training, vocational training. Are we at an inflection point where actually if we came together a bit more or better, we'd move the needle faster?
I think before I answer that, I just want to say I've been in the industry for 2 years, so I can't claim to know all of that, but I think at the same time, the collaboration, and we've seen it from today, and most people have talked about it, and that collaboration has got to be here. We're all delivering the same project. We just have our different, our different role to play in that delivery of it. And from Sublime's perspective, as an installer, as a manufacturer, we just want to serve that, mechanical contractor to say, okay, how can we do this? What's our input into it? How can we do it better? How can we do it smarter? If we can all get the efficiencies of it, then we all win. And I think so I think even wider than that, when we look at the government and academia and, talk about apprentices and the courses that we need to support them into the future, and they will be technologically advanced than we are, no doubt about it, but, that skill set of understanding how to make a piece of duct and how to install it needs to be progressive too, because, the processes do change, and that, the structure behind it needs to also be accommodating to that.
Thank you. I'm gonna move on. I want to talk about rework a bit, and I'm going to come to you with this one. The data showed us that around 28% of project budget is being wasted on rework. Could you share with us, with your perspective, ways to sort of avoid this? And I guess we're going to come in from the early stages. And then I've got another question already, but let's go with this one first.
I definitely think more investment of time early on in the job would, give us big dividends. Programs are often too tight. We're designing on the fly. Things that can be getting installed as we're designing. So bringing everybody to the table at those early stages as well, and making sure we've got builder input, trade input on designs to streamline what moves forward next is helpful, and end user representatives as well, because often some of that rework comes when we get people coming in, understanding what's going on late in the project, and wanting change based on not having been informed from the beginning. So, there's that. There's thinking about staging and how you can manage staging where it's suboptimal. I guess products and verification of those products in good time to make sure we're not moving forward based on assumptions that prove to be problematic down the track. Even simple things like making sure final approvals are in place so that they don't hold up the design process.
So does it mean early contractor involvement, would that be a way to solve for this to some extent?
I think it helps, but I also think, we just need more design time, particularly as we're chasing better and better outcomes on our projects, as we're moving forward, needing to have more, better sustainability outcomes. We need the time to be innovative, creative, and also get the basics right.
So you kind of went on what I wanted to ask now, but I still have a bit of a question. The time, more time for design, making sure we get it right and we get it right up front and we get it right the first time. Is there something that regulators or planning red tape, I'm not having a go at anybody in government, I promise, it's a genuine question, but is there something here that could change?
Possibly. I mean, one of the things when we're thinking about the construction side of things that I was reflecting on was essentially the blind spots in construction. I still think there's some integration of, or maybe better definement of roles in the construction phase. But what I'm thinking about as an example is facade trades. So, you know, as a sustainability consultant, we're really, really focused on wanting to get high performance, and building envelope is critical to that high performance because it dictates how much energy the building systems use. But often those are the things that slip through the cracks. You know, it's probably a combination of skills shortages, but maybe also lack of anyone watching over certain details and things getting covered up before they get inspected. And on the design side, perhaps no one's actually got it on their agenda to inspect some of those things. So, you know, we're moving towards buildings that need to be airtight. That's been very much something that the industry's been progressing over the last 5, probably 10 years. The details of how we just install insulation in a building and not leaving gaps and making sure it's properly continuous, and thinking about when a services penetration moves through that, it's dealt with properly, because all of those things lead to poor performance if they're not done properly. Passive House is a standard that, you know, puts a really good methodology forward for how you do those things. But we shouldn't need to be leaning on that and certifying as Passive House. We should be bringing those things into what we do every day and designing better buildings based on just a high level of quality control.
So I think we're talking about really setting new standards, but to what Alex was saying as well.
Yeah.
Mark, I'm going to come back to you. I want to continue a bit on the rework. The numbers I shared earlier were 32% of the margin erosion is tied or can be tied to rework for mechanical contractors in particular. 28% of the industry reports very high margin losses, right? So with this in mind, there are multiple solutions, new tech being implemented, but what I'd like to hear from you is what you're seeing in the field. How are you tackling this? And maybe also, where is the biggest opportunity to reduce rework through tech? Not tech as an end, tech as a tool. How are you using it with your team?
Yep. Well, I mean, we probably have some clients in the audience, so we don't have reworks. We're defect-free. We're pretty good. Well, reality is, yes, we have defects, and it's something that we need to be on top of. We have reworks. For us, we want to capture a defect before our clients get to it. It's all about, you know, learning from anything that's not right in the workplace. The worst thing we can do is install something and walk away from it, but that's not right. Now, at that point, obviously, we need something to be able to collect it. So, you know, through an observation, a defect. But even more importantly than that, then is, okay, so what is the learning outcome from that? So the continuous improvement part of it, what do we do with that? So what's the root cause of that issue? What's the training? Is it a process thing? Let's have a look at our process. Is it a one-off thing? Is it something that we need to manipulate and change for the future? Is it, a behavioral thing, in which case, if it's a one-off, okay, we all have issues, we all have, blips. But if it's something that's reoccurring, certainly we want to then say, okay, this is a training opportunity. Let's make sure that we highlight that for that installer, or wherever in our business it is. It doesn't necessarily need to be an installer. But then so that we can get that training program in place. With that, obviously, we've got digitalization of a matrix of understanding who's who, what their skill sets are, and then we can obviously adapt to make sure that we're sending the right people to the right places so that we can try and eliminate that. We also get reworks, obviously, when we sort of move out of an area and we have left a gap for a site measure and we haven't fulfilled that. So, I mean, we're using things like a 3D digital model with a scan app, which we're currently implementing, so that we can see the track of the duct installing as we go, and a supervisor on site can see that he's got a gap somewhere else. Is there a site measure attached to it? If not, okay, why not? Is it a clash? No, it's on us. Okay, we need to get that done. And we can try and fix those gaps to minimize the cost of coming back, a week later when we've got to bring all the equipment back down to do, a 30-minute job that's now just taking you 3 hours. So more about visually seeing a project on a screen so you can see where your problem areas are and then dive into it.
I have too many notes to follow up, but I'm going to keep going there, and I'm going to go back to you. Rework, we talked about it, you gave us examples about to solve for it. If we think more holistically and think about the life cycle, maybe of a project, but even of a construction phase, just that rework equals waste. There is an impact on sustainability. The agenda around ESG and sustainability, nobody here, I'm sure, can hide away from it. You can't deny it. We will hear it every day. So with this in mind, what do you think would sustainability gain from shrinking this rework proportion?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good perspective, I think. Rework is wasted materials, but it's also money and time. So if we can reduce that percentage of rework down from the 28%, that 28% can be used to improve basic performance features, essentially. So, whether that's double glazing or additional insulation or smart controls for HVAC, there's plenty of things that we're trying to get into project budgets that rework is working against, and ultimately, better performance, reducing our energy demand in our building. And then, yes, it means, less materials going to landfill, which is also a sustainability win. And the time that's saved in not doing the rework means we've got more time to do the good stuff and not spend the brain power on the rework component. So we get better productivity, I guess, and program planning out of that. And again, comes back to quality control, and better outcomes on a project.
And we go back to one of the findings from the report here, which is the optimization of the priority or productivity, right? Low task versus a task with the longer or the most impactful for the project, the life of the project. So, Alex, I want to move on, but do you have anything to add maybe? Because I know rework is something we look at a lot at Procore. Do you agree with what's been said? Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, those points about how rework impacts your environmental outcomes are very apparent. There's also no job out there that has an abundance of rework that is a safe job either. So it impacts your safety as well and your safety outcomes. For me, rework's the thing that drew me to technology. When I was in the industry, it was something that I also managed. I worked in fit out, so as you can imagine, it's very finicky jobs, and there's a lot of defects. So on any walk, I'd find 500 to 1,000 defects within 3 to 4 hours of walking around. We were doing $15 to $20 million commercial fit out jobs. Did some big refurbs as well, like we're talking 20, 30 stories as well, which were in the hundreds of millions. But all in all, lots of defects, and we had a very high desire to produce quality work. It's just that we didn't necessarily have all of the great proactive approaches to make sure that we mitigated many of the defects that were occurring. And we didn't have really great ways to measure the data before we would kind of be in that situation. So, that's what kind of drew me to Procore. We started looking at it when I was in the industry in 2017. And once I'd seen it, I thought, okay, great, there are better ways to manage it. I would go around with 2 phones, take a photo, take a note, take a photo, take a note, go back to the office, compile all of that into some spreadsheet, put some filters on it, split it out by trade, email each individual trade. They'd probably print it off, redline it as they fix things, send it back to me in a scanned email. Then I'd have to go back to the master spreadsheet, speaking about spreadsheets, and kind of edit it all, redo all the trade lists, send them all back out again, week on week, just to try and get all of that as narrow as I could before we head into our DLP period, which is a nightmare. And I didn't want to go back to jobs, but you'd find yourself going back to jobs all the time. It's in the How We Build Now report, 42% of respondents said that efficient data management enhances our decision making. So what we're trying to get out of all of it is have the data that supports mitigating a lot of the rework. So, I mean, back to that same story, another big reason why I joined Procore, not just to kind of impact the way that our technology was designed to manage the rework, but how we could invent new ways to support processes that were already existing, things like ITP processes, inspection processes, and manage them more holistically so that we could mitigate a lot of the rework from occurring. And so, there are systems out there that will enable the data capture, help you communicate more effectively, have real-time collaboration, streamline those workflows, share updates in real time, resolve issues more promptly, but also that help you process that more proactively as well, which enable you to get the data. And then, in the How We Build Now report again, 53% said that a focus on quality as a strategy will reduce waste and enhance sustainable outcomes and safety outcomes. So getting the data and that predictive modelling is just as important, being able to identify patterns, anticipate those potential risks, and optimise construction processes to avoid the rework in the first place rather than deal with it when it does occur.
So back to getting it right the first time, but with solutions. So sorry, I looked at my watch. I realised I'm almost at time, but I do have one more question for Mark before we wrap up, and we'll have maybe a couple of minutes for a few questions. So if you have questions, write them down. Please make the most out of the panellists. Mark, I want to go back to maybe one of my first slides, or the earlier ones, on payments. It's the slide where we show that 32% of mechanical contractors, only 32, got paid within 30 days of invoiced work. We sort of went a bit further in the report and we sort of asked them what would be your recommendation. So when I say they, it's the respondents. And they came with two answers. The first answer was better financial management software and more process automation. Those were the answer from the respondents. So my question to you is, are you surprised, firstly, by the data I talked about and I presented? And secondly, what would be your call to action or your recommendation, I guess, for anybody else to start the digitisation journey?
Yeah. So I think to answer the first part of the question as far as the payment claims go, well, the payment days. So no real surprise in the sense that when you look at benchmarking in the construction industry, generally is around about the 60 days. If I'm looking at Sublime's perspective, we do have, and we're introducing even more items with the scan app so that we can scan this off, get the 3D model, but also in behind that, we have the data that then can tell us, start to put a payment claim together. We can share that equally with our clients, and we can just have open conversations about what work has been completed, not necessarily having to keep doing site walks just to prove a case or disprove a case. But again, I think the technology part will get you so far, but then it's that business sense as well. We've got relationships. We still, we talk data, and data is important. There's no doubt about it. Equally, our relationships are more important in my view, in the sense that we've had we are not at that end of the 60 days. We have, our client base is very good. We have good relationships with them. We do get paid on time, and with those relationships, we look to strengthen them. And there's times when we've called and we've actually received better payment terms, and that's it's because of the relationship, not because we've got data to prove a point. And I think it's important that we have that blend. The data is important, no doubt about it. But equally, we've got to have that business mentality of we're more than just data. But I guess in regards to someone going down the path, I think it's everything we've talked about, even the rework side of it. There's all those supporting roles where we actually end up doing reworks. So someone's installed it, they've noted down that we've installed it, we grab it, we'd say we've installed it onto an Excel spreadsheet, and then we take it somewhere else to then try and populate a payment claim. And I think it's that thing of just understanding that all of that is waste. Literally, if it enters the system once and then you can grab it through automation, then you don't have all of that extra waste that you've got to do just transferring data around. And I think that's something that even as duct installers and manufacturers, we understand that that's not just what we do. We have to be more than that. So I think to stimulate the technology advancing, we've got to understand that we're more than just that trade. We've got to actually be a little bit better than that, more of a service provider too.
Service provider based on relationships, now more than ever, I agree. So we're at time. I want to wrap up. This is my last challenge or question for the panellists, and then if anybody has a question, please let us know. In 30 seconds max, what's the big ticket item, the one piece of advice for us to walk away with from today's session? And Mark, I'm going to start with you.
I think for Sublime, our take on it at the moment is that obviously we're a piece of the puzzle, but that puzzle in itself is going to be the full picture. And I think that's what we've got to understand. The more we can share information, the more that we can be open and collaborate and understand where our pain points are, understand where we cause pain points, and we can work on the things that we're in control of. And I think the whole technology side of it is just more about assisting us in navigating to the specifics. If it's a process-driven thing, then the main core of it should just happen. The items that pop up, they're the things that need attention, and it means you've got more focus to deliver on those. So I think the technology is here, and we need to keep moving with it.
Thank you. Alex, same question.
Yeah, I'll keep it short. Looking at the bigger picture, don't do things because that's the way that they've always been done. That's always something that I try to consider now, even in my own work now at Procore. there is usually a better way to do it. Technology can support you, but you have to be open to changing process, and you have to be open to how that technology will help you change that process. Change is hard, but the world's changing and we need to change with it.
Thank you, Hannah. Same question, big ticket item.
Well, we need to be delivering net zero buildings by 2030. It's not just new buildings. We need to be working out what we're doing with all the existing buildings and the retrofits. And I think for us, we need everybody in the industry to make that happen. We can design things a certain way, but we need to make sure that that construction and final outcome of the building meets the design intent. And I think, the way that that's going to happen is through better collaboration, and digital is a huge part of that. Like, if we don't have that, I think we're going to be really struggling. We need to drill down into the next level of performance, and that's where it really is heading.
Thank you. I'm going to add one. Steve, the bio that you had to read was actually AI generated. It wasn't mine. I'm going to add AI on the considerations. We have our own AI at Procore. AI wrote the bio of Procore that I sent to AMCA for this, and AI actually helped me pick the themes of the questions for today when I asked them about priorities for subcontractors. So I'm just going to add AI to the layer here. We're at time. Thank you very much. Please give me a round of applause for Mark, Alex, and Hannah. Thank you for your time.